Hi, this is Joseph Yanuziello, guitar builder, and you're listening to Talking Blues.
So, Joseph, I get the impression your dad built a lot of things.
Mhm.
He was a builder of sorts.
Yeah,
Does that have direct impact on what you do today? Is that the reason?
I wouldn't have thought so earlier on, but definitely now I think that's the case. He had a big influence on myself and my brother. My brother's a contractor of the highest order. He's a totally talented guy. In fact, he's my go-to if I had a wiring problem or a plumbing problem. Well, my father, from an early age, we lived, I was born at Spadina College, basically. And I remember as a young boy, my father was always making stuff. In the basement, he'd be doing this and that with wood and metal. Um, at that time, he was a metal worker. He had a sheet metal shop at Harvard and Robert Street. We lived on Robert Street at Spadina College. My grandmother lived two doors down from us. There were primarily that neighborhood was Italian, pretty much half Italian, half Jewish in the 50s. And I have a lot of fond memories of that neighborhood going to Kensington Market with my family, with my grandmother, with my aunt. Yeah, it was a wonderful time. And my father's sheet metal shop was really 5 minutes up the road. So I'd get on my tricycle and I could go up as far as Harvard or go down as far as college on my like nowhere else. So I'd go up to Harvard and go in the laneway where my dad's sheet metal shop was and watch him working. And he was, there was no wood involved in that, but he was making stuff. And he did through my whole life. And when I got out of art college, I'd already been woodworking because of my father. I started with him summers as a teenage boy, working on job sites. He was a custom house builder for quite a while too. My father did a lot of different things. He was a car mechanic at one point, working on British cars for my uncle. He was a woodworker. He built cabinets. He did a lot of different things. So it really kind of, I don't know, instilled in me a sense of ability to do things without worrying about, like, just kind of dive in. And that's what my father did. He dove into anything he did like that. He was very inspiring without actually sitting down and talking to me about how to do this or that. I just kind of watched him. It was more by osmosis. So from early on, I kind of had an idea of how things went together and how to do things, which paid off down the road now, for example. You know, all of the stuff that I saw my father do, I've been using that throughout, my career as a guitar builder and a cabinet maker as well.
Which is what you went into first, is it not? Is it
Oh,
more cabinet building?
yeah. When I was a kid, I worked with my dad on houses and, I hung out and did. I wasn't really concerned about a career at that point. Um, but it was definitely there. That stuff was something I was interested in. So I went to Europe for a year. I actually got accepted at OCA and decided not to go. I went to Europe with a friend or two. We were there for a year, which was a big time for me. I was about 20 years old. So this is around 1970. No, I would have been 18. 1970, I was 18. And that trip to Europe made a huge impression on me. Just everything about it, the food, the architecture, the lifestyles, just everything that was there was important to me down the road and made a big impression on me. So when I got back to Canada, my intention was to get a job, any job, to get enough money to go back to Europe and see all of this stuff over again and, and experience it with more intensity. But I got into working and one thing led to another and I got accepted at Sheridan Art College, not for woodworking, for fine art. And after my 3 years there, I was painting and screen printing and I was doing some wooden sculptures. It was interesting because sometimes an instructor would come up to me. I'd be building something out of wood, a sculpture, and they'd say, "Hey, can you make a coffee table?" And sure, yeah. So I make a coffee table, deliver it, get paid in money. So a light bulb went on. It was kind of a tangible way to have fun and make money doing it. So woodworking was more the thing than art. When I got out of art college, I wasn't actually that interested in painting or screen printing. I was more interested in woodworking. It was kind of a strange thing. So I started. How did it go? It was a long time ago now. I ended up with a cabinet job that was not great. It was a lot of arborite, formica, that production shop doing store fixtures. But I was making a living at it, and that kind of gave me a lot of skill with small tools like routers and hand planes and files, which I've used now like crazy, like making all my hardware with, all the stuff that I used then to make cabinets out of arborite and formica. Um, Trying to think what happened.
I wonder, when you went to art school, I know you said that that wasn't going to lead directly into a profession, but what did you hope to accomplish at art school?
Well, I was always kind of interested in drawing and painting. I did that a lot when I was a kid, just, sketching stuff. So it just led to that because my father was actually a bit of a painter too, so that may have influenced me as well. He went to Central Tech on Harvard, and yeah, I don't know. It was just the thing I wanted to do at the time. I had no master plan at all, really. When I got back from Europe, it was just, I wanted to go back there, and then I got into art college and then into woodworking. So after my first cabinet job, I was sort of intrigued with the whole idea of making furniture. That was kind of the thing for me. Eventually, I got into a cabinet shop that was really a good one, like a small shop, and I got hired because I could read blueprints, basically. So started in with that custom cabinet making, furniture for store fixtures for restaurants, private homes. This person I worked for had a lot of high end clientele. He was an artist himself, and so he is fairly connected. He and his wife, who was a photographer, they had a lot of connections, which served his woodworking business. So I became kind of the lead hand there, and we ended up doing all sorts of for about 4 years. All we did was work for the Catholic Church. Did a lot of carvings, a lot of fixtures for the altar, like bishop's chairs, all sorts of big deal furniture, like hard stuff to make. Carved a lot of Corinthian capitals and stuff like that. And it was fascinating. I learned so much at that job.
Did you play the guitar?
Yeah, well, that's something I haven't even talked about. Yeah, when I was 15 or 16, I started playing the guitar, and that was a whole other fascinating thing too. Was playing a musical instrument. I mean, it was wide open for me. I was so interested in so many things. It was kind of hard in a way to focus, and I felt like I didn't really have to because it was so much to do all the time. I was young. I had zero responsibility other than enjoying myself and whatnot. So the guitar, yeah, came into play about 15 or 16, and the bands of the day were influential, like the Beatles, the Yardbirds, all of that stuff from the '60s and into the '70s was huge for me. And I played fingerstyle. I learned how to do that, like Travis picking and so on. And that just led to more playing and playing with friends. I got into bluegrass in the '70s. Not that I was a bluegrass player per se, but I really liked the instrumentation, especially the dobro. So I eventually bought a dobro for a couple $100, like a dobro from the '70s, and learned how to play that a little bit. I wasn't great at it, but I was intrigued with the instrument itself and the woodworking thing, the playing thing. So eventually, I got to a point where it was around 1979 when I decided I could maybe build a guitar, and that's kind of how it went from that point. I had enough skill to do it. I didn't have any teachers. I wasn't aligned with any of the builders that I now know, like Linda, Ingrid, Dave Wren, Tony Duggan Smith. They're all friends, and they're all incredibly talented. And of course, we're under the wing of Jean Larrivée, which I didn't have any of that. I'm self-taught, pretty much everything I've done, and so the guitars, because I could woodwork, the guitar building part wasn't too difficult for me. I had a pretty good idea how to do it. I bought Irving Sloane's book.
What was the first guitar you built?
Guitar I built was a flat top, and I wasn't going by a pattern. I just kind of drew a shape, made the mold. I bought Irving Sloane's book, like a lot of people my age did, and that was kind of my learning tool. Was that very thing. I didn't attend to any classes or anything, so whatever I could pick up was through that book and a couple of other publications. There wasn't much out there pre-internet. It was hard to get information. So unless you worked in a music store or you apprenticed under another builder, it was kind of difficult to do. But I persevered, and after that first guitar, I thought I'll build another. The second guitar I built was a 16-inch arch top. I just kind of the last chapter of that book, Irving Sloane's book, was about Jimmy DeGuisto, and it killed me. I couldn't believe somebody could make something like that, so I had to give it a try. So I bought wood and carved this top and back and glued it to the rims, and away I went. Yeah, I had this arch top, and it was fairly successful. But I'd done that. So then after that point, I started making electric guitars. So every time I'd build a guitar, I'd think about something else I would want to try based on often the musicians I was listening to. Like I said, the bluegrass thing was pretty important to me. And after I had that dobro, I sold it, and a few friends asked if I could play on a demo or something dobro, and I didn't have one because I sold it. So I ended up making one. I made two at once, and they both sold to friends of mine. And that was the start of the dobro thing for me. And then it just led to so many other things.
Okay, so if we go back to that first guitar,
Yeah.
and you said it came somewhat easy to you. I mean, how good was that first guitar that you built?
Oh, it weighed a ton. It was crappy, but the woodworking part was good. I still have it upstairs, actually. It's kind of a funny thing. My daughter will end up with it at some point. Yeah, it was okay. It's a guitar. It's an average sounding guitar. It's not spectacular, but it's not crappy either. I mean, it works as a guitar, and it's still hanging in there.
Okay, so what amazes me about you, and I don't know if it's the same with all luthiers, but obviously you started off with a flat top, then very quickly you went to an electric guitar. Then you've done resonators, you've done mandolins, you've done tons of different instruments. I don't know, is that an easy thing? Like I just picture people building guitars and thinking, I got to get better at this, and kind of doing it over and over and over again to get better at it. But you seem to move on, and I know you keep coming back and whatever, but you've built a lot of different instruments.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
obviously building an electric guitar is quite different from building an acoustic guitar,
Yes.
which would be different from building a mandolin. Like,
Yes.
or am I wrong in that?
No, they're all related. Obviously, anything with strings and frets, especially, applies to this kind of knowledge and building. Um, the acoustic guitar thing for me was, I'm a real fan of vintage Martins and Gibsons, especially. I love all that stuff, and I'm fascinated with it. So when I make a flat top now, it's really more. I'm not trying to, burn any. I'm not going for new territory. I'm just trying to make something that sounds really good. So I make a double O, I make an L00, I make an OM style guitar. All of these things, I'm really just trying to do what those guys did, and do it my way and do it as good as I can. So I don't necessarily have. I probably have a really good overall skill level with building an instrument, like an electric. I don't even know how to describe this. Now that you've asked me this question, I'm trying to think of why I do this. Um, I think part of the thing for me is more about the kind of music I listen to. So when I discovered like bluegrass musicians and really good folk musicians, I was a huge Leo Kottke fan, and people like that played in that style. This is going way back to the '70s, and that made a big impression on me. I didn't want to go out and build, what Leo Kottke was playing necessarily, but all of those sounds I was hearing were important to me. And then when I discovered people like Ry Cooder and David Lindley, those guys really kind of turned me on to what was possible doing, um, using those kind of instruments that they were using for the kind of music they were playing. Integrating different kinds of it, especially David Lindley. I mean, he plays Zaz, he plays oud, he plays all sorts of different instruments and incorporates them into his repertoire. Um, and I find that really fascinating. So I think that's one of the reasons I build a lot of different things, because if I hear something on a record or in a live concert setting, oh, wow, that thing's amazing. I'd like to try a version of that, my own thing. So putting my stamp on those instruments is what I've tried to do, really. I make electric guitars, electric baritone guitars, electric mandolin family, which is where Kevin comes in. Actually, he's been pretty inspirational for me. He'll come up with an idea and ask me if I can do it. When I did the NAMM show, my first guitar show was 1995. I went to Nashville and I wanted to try it on. I was still building furniture, but I wanted to make a move into building instruments because I'd made my first guitar in 1979. So quite a bit of time had elapsed as a cabinet maker. I had my own business at this time. And I was still building guitars. Like I'd made maybe 5, 6, 7 guitars a year. But it wasn't full time. I was still providing, a living with the cabinet making, which was a good living actually. Cabinet making can be great. So once I did the NAMM show, I thought, well, I'm going to make more instruments and see if I can actually push this through to making a living at it. I didn't dive into the deep end of the pool. I did it fairly slowly. It was really an organic process for me of going from being a cabinet maker, furniture designer into building guitars full time.
At that point, you've been making guitars for almost 20 years,
Yes, yeah,
correct?
yep.
Did you know how good you were at that point?
Well,
Well, how good were you at the point where you decided I'm going to do this and make it full time?
yeah, I thought my instruments were good. They were actually. So what I've done really is just continue to do what I was doing and make improvements, aesthetic improvements, and just add things, different types of hardware. When I first designed my electric guitar was 1982. That's how long ago. The same shape I'm using today, I built and designed back in 1982. And back then, there wasn't a lot of hardware available. Like you couldn't get a lot of different pickups. There were DiMarzios and old Fender and whatever you could get to put in an instrument. So I think I used humbuckers in the first one, and I bought a Strat bridge and screwed that on. So really, I was using hardware on this original shape that I still use. So eventually, it got to a point where, in fact, I think it was Rob Pilch. I don't know do you know Rob, guitar player? Yeah,
I do.
great musician. And a long time ago, he brought his Harmony Stratotone into my shop and said, "Hey, can you make one of your guitars, but more like this?" So I said, "Sure." So I made a hollow mahogany guitar with a spruce top, wooden bridge, more like kind of an archtop format, tailpiece, the whole thing, and that was the start of it, really, for making hardware. I thought, wow, making hardware out of metal is fun. That was the first tailpiece I made for Rob. And because I had all this experience with Arborite and Formica and hand files, it wasn't a hard thing. So I draw something out and figure out how to make it. And I have no metalworking tools. It's all like woodworking stuff. So the metal I use is all non-ferrous, like brass, copper, aluminum, or what I can manipulate using my woodworking tools because carbide cutters will cut that stuff quite easily. So that's what I've been doing ever since. Making all of this hardware has really changed the game for me. So now I can offer all sorts of different pickup configurations, bridges, tailpieces. I have these Bigsby vibratos that I totally modify. So yeah, it's sort of, and I'm still going there with it. I make all the knobs and all sorts of things. It's so much fun for me. So that one original design I came up with in 1982 has had so many iterations and continues to. So every one is pretty much a one of a kind. I mean, I get repeats now of something because I've built so many electric instruments, especially people can kind of pick details and then assemble what they want from me. So that's how it's been now for years. So my guitars, I think, were always of a good quality, but they were fairly basic at the start. But now I've upped my game by just adding all sorts of details, like hardware, especially.
How much of your being a musician, and I'm not sure at what level of musician you are, but how much does that play into the guitars that you make?
Um, I was a reasonably good guitar player earlier on. I mean, my hands have failed me. I can still play a bit, but it's a lot harder to play now. I lost a finger about 10 years ago when I moved out this where I am now. I cut one of my fingers off on a jointer and a little bit of my thumb. So it made it hard to finger pick. And even holding a pick is difficult. I can still do it somewhat, but that's less important to me. But back then, yeah, I could play well enough to determine if a guitar I was playing was a good one or not, including ones I made. So it would be difficult, I think, for me to make an instrument without having the ability to play it. I'm always fascinated when people can do that. They don't play too much, but they can still make these incredible instruments. Leo Fender is a good example of that. But he had a lot of people around him that advised him as well, I think. But as an individual luthier, yeah, it would be difficult. It would be like somebody asking me to make a violin. I could make a violin, but I wouldn't have any idea if it was a good one or a bad one or exceptional. I really wouldn't know. I don't have the criteria to judge that. The neck shape, everything about it is foreign to me. I know what it looks like and it's made out of wood and I could definitely make one, but no idea. But the guitars, I have a really good idea. So when someone asks for very specific neck shapes and dimensions like that, I know pretty much what they're asking for just by talking with them. So dealing with the customer now is really important. A lot of people have input into what they get from me, based on a lot of things that they see that I've done. We assemble something, but then when you get down to the mechanics of it and holding it and playing it and how it feels in your hand, that's really the fun part, I think, for me and for the customer, because there's a lot of back and forth on specs. And that's really an important thing. Sometimes people go make what you want, which is good too, because then I can make what I want within, what they direct me to. But sometimes there's a list that's half a mile long of specs and things to pay attention to, how far the strings are from the edge of the fingerboard, the shape of the neck, especially, and things like that are a big deal to a lot of players. And I get that. I understand because I play. So I know that they want something very specific. And it's a bit of a nail biter because you're hoping when you deliver this thing, they open the case and take it out and try it, that it's going to be what they want. That's always a bit frightening, but exhilarating too. It's exciting for both parties, I think.
So if we go back to that guy who decided that he's gonna go at guitar building full time
Yes.
back in the late '90s, tell me about what you're hoping to accomplish with that. Like, did you have goals that said either I want to make this kind of money or I want to make this many instruments, or like what goals did you have for yourself when you decided to go out on your own and build guitars?
Well, I could see that I could make a living at it. That was pretty obvious because I'd already made quite a few instruments at that point. So I knew it was doable. And I had all the woodworking tools because I had my own business. I had a pretty big cabinet shop. I sold all the larger machinery and downsized the machinery. And away I went. I mean, I had everything there all ready to do this. So once again, no big plan financially or anything. I just started making guitars and selling them. And before the internet, I'd get 8x10 glossies printed of my instruments and do a big mailer, sit there with a letter, cover letter, and send them out to different musicians. Sometimes I'd hear back, sometimes not, crickets. And it just went that way. And really, people like Kevin have been instrumental for me, so to speak. He's been really great. He's probably responsible for me selling a lot of instruments at this point, because people see Kevin play and they get all excited because he's a wild man and he's so talented and incredibly creative with what he does with anything. He's got, I guess, 9 or 10 of my instruments at this point. And it's always fun working with someone like Kevin. And there's other musicians too that I've dealt with. Don Rook's another one. Don's a great musician. He has the very first dobro I ever made, and I've made him 3 or 4 instruments since then as well.
How important is that though? So, like, you decide that you're going to go out on your own, and obviously by this time you have a bit of a following. But do you think, okay, I need a name player to be playing my instrument? Like, does that come into play, or do you not think that way? You just think if I make quality instruments, they will come, as opposed to if I get somebody like Kevin Bright to play, then others people will recognize that, and then the people
Well,
will come.
sure, that definitely happened with Kevin and a few other people. I through Kevin, I got to make a guitar for Bill Frisell a long time ago, about 20 years ago now. In fact, it happened because Kevin had a gig with Bill at the Guelph Jazz Fest, and I remember Kevin calling me at the shop, and he said, "Joe, do you have an electric guitar?" Because he had a mandolin, electric mando, resonator guitar, probably a couple of other things I built, and but not an electric guitar. So he phoned me up and asked if I had one available, and I just happened to have one on the bench. Um, and I phoned the customer and said, "Hey, can I loan this to Kevin to show to Bill Frisell?" And the customer was, yeah, he was a big Bill Frisell fan, so he said, "Yeah, sure." So Kevin phoned me from his place the next day, and I hear this guitar wailing in the background. And Kevin said, "Hey, Joe, that's that's Bill. He's playing your guitar. He really likes. He wants to meet you. So I got to meet Bill at the after the gig. Had a word with him, and he said, "Could you make me a guitar like this one?" So I made it for him. But that was about a day before 9/11. So
Wow.
everything stopped. I didn't hear from Bill for about 2 months, I guess. And he did. I thought nothing of it. I thought, okay, maybe he'll call me, maybe he won't. He did call me back, and we talked about building a guitar, and I did that and delivered it to him. He played it a fair bit. It's on a bunch of recordings. He plays a lot of different instruments. It's certainly not his main instrument, but that was great too. So a lot of people have ordered what he had for me at that point. It's a very similar thing, and I still make them like that too with the spruce tops.
So I'm curious how you first got together with Kevin, or how did Kevin find you, or how did you find Kevin?
I remember seeing the Bright Brothers at a bar in Toronto. I went with a friend of mine and Chris Bennett, actually. You might know Chris. And Chris said, "You should see this guy." I didn't know who Kevin was. So he introduced me to Kevin, and we talked about guitars, and he knew I built guitars at that point. I'd mentioned that, and he said, "Hey, do you do any repairs?" I said, "Sure, yeah." So he brought over something. I think it was a resonator guitar, and I worked on it. And one thing led to another, and I can't remember I think the first guitar I made for Kevin was actually a resonator, one of my round neck dobro style resonators, and that just led to more repairs. And when I went to the NAMM show in '95, I took three resonator guitars, a couple of electrics, and I made an electric mandolin for that show specifically because I wanted to take something different. So I'd never made an electric mandolin before, but so I went to Kinko's and scaled down my electric guitar into the size of a mandolin. I did that for all of them. So the mandolin, mandola, mandocello, octave mandolin, and guitar body are all the same shape, just different sizes. Thank God for Kinko's. And so I made the mandolin, took it to the show, and Kevin saw it when I came back and showed it to him, and he ordered one. So then I made one for him, and then one day he phoned and said, "Hey, could you make a mandola?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So just expanded it and turned it into a mandola, tuned a different way and fits, and that's how it went with Kevin. Um, I probably and the other one that was important that he wanted for me was this thing I call a cupcake. So he was traveling a lot with Cassandra Wilson at the time, and he needed something that he could put in the overhead compartment of the airplane. He was taking his Rickenbacker Bakelite from the '30s to play slide guitar, and he wanted something like a mandolin to fit in the case with it, or he had his Mando at that point too. So he said, "Can you make a little electric guitar that would be sort of this size?" And I said, "Yeah." So I designed that up and built that for him, and he took it on tour. And then I started to get orders for those. I put them on social media, and people responded, and hey, can you make me one in red or whatever? So that's kind of how it's gone. So because of Kevin, I probably made about three or four different instruments that I maybe wouldn't have made without him. So he's been fairly inspirational that way for me too. It's been really good.
So, we're at the beginning of the year, 10th of January. And so do you have a plan? Like, I don't know how many you make and how long it takes to make different instruments, but I presume you know that. How far out do you plan out? How many instruments are on order for you?
Well, I've got a couple of years in front of me now, and I have had for a while. So I've had to close my building list because I only make maybe between 14 and 17 instruments a year, depending on what they are. In fact, right now I'm working on a 16-inch arch top for a customer and an OM for another customer on the West Coast. So after those, I've got a bunch of electrics. I mean, it's all over the map. I just got an order for a resonator guitar, which I'll be making in a couple of years. I don't make too many rezos now. Originally, that's all I made. When I built those first two square neck resonator guitars, I think I just made resonator guitars for about 3 years straight. That was it. Everybody wanted resonator guitars. It was the weirdest thing. So I like making them. I still do. So every once in a while I get an order. What's interesting about my situation is because I make so many different things, it really it's exciting all the time because if I haven't made something for a year and a half and I get an order for one, then I have to kind of dig through my notes and remember everything. So I have to kind of retrain myself. It kind of keeps me sharp in a way, if you will. So there's no just resting on the laurels of using this jig, building this, playing something with my eyes closed. There's none of that. I have to kind of pay attention. Well, everybody does anyway, but I really have to pay attention because it's like I haven't made this thing for a couple of years. I should figure out how to do it again. And then I kind of retrain myself, and that's how it goes. Even with the arch top too, I'm looking at my notes as I speak. I mean, I know how to do it, but I want to nail it. So I have to be really careful about the procedure, and there's always improvements to make, which you want to do with every instrument as well. It's a learning curve. I think one of my favorite quotes is, I think someone asked Pablo Casals why he still practices. He's in his 90s. He said, you've heard this, I'm sure. He said, well, I think I'm finally making some progress, or something to that effect. So the whole idea being it's a learning process all the way up until you stop doing it. And I'm still learning. I still learn things about what I'm doing. And I'm a hand builder in every way too. I don't. If I was a younger guy, I'd probably go the CNC route. I haven't done that at all. Everything I make with these hands. I just all of it. Um, and that machinery allows you to put things out quicker and probably with more consistency. But the inconsistency of building doesn't bother me at all because every instrument has a personality, just like we all do. So every time I make an instrument, it's its own thing. It's one of my kids out there, and it's not like its brother or sister. So I'm fine with that. In fact, I embrace that, and I think people come to me for that reason too. I don't do production at all. Everything I make is truly handmade. So there's, yeah, that's exciting for people because they can get something from me that they wouldn't get from someone else.
Was there ever thought when you first began that if it was successful, you wanted to grow big, or did you always think I needed to be a custom thing that my hands are building every single one?
Yeah, it's funny because with the furniture, I was more production oriented because if you're doing store fixtures, sometimes you have to make ten cabinets that are pretty much identical. So you set up jigs and fixtures to make that feasible and doable within a time frame. It's a lot different for me in fact, I think I kind of ran away from that into the guitars and wanted to slow it down a bit and enjoy it more by doing it the way I've been doing it versus production. Production's great, there's no doubt about it. And I'm kind of fascinated with any kind of production, like Leo Fender's thing, Henry Ford's thing. That whole idea of mass producing something is valuable. You're doing it efficiently and with less waste, perhaps, and no spinning your wheels. You're just doing this, and it moves forward all the time. And I move forward with the guitars the way I build them, but it's radically different from how I would do furniture, for example. So I really like the idea of making guitars by hand. There's a lot of people doing them with machines and so on, and that's fine too. That's all great. But for me personally, this is what I want to do, and that's how it goes.
So I wonder, because I'm not a player,
Hmm.
so I don't know I know that people who guitar players love their guitars. I know that many have multiple guitars,
Yeah.
and many cannot have enough guitars. But if I was a player, why do I choose your guitar versus a Fender or a Gibson or Larrivee or whatever? Would you be able to answer that?
Yeah, part of establishing a brand, which I think I have finally after all these years of doing this, and do it within the same body shape and the headstock shape and my logo, it's all identifiable. And I purposely didn't want to do what Fender or Gibson did. So when I started designing an electric guitar in 1982, I remember coming up with a body shape that I liked. It took me a while to do that, and I did it. I drew it out by hand and had the French curves and everything out, and I finally got a shape that I really liked. And part of it was because of what I wanted to play myself. So I designed that electric guitar for me, and I wanted to stay away from the Fender Gibson thing. So even the pickups that I chose to use back then, post that first couple of guitars when I used humbucking pickups and whatever I could get, I kind of clued into the fact that harmony guitars and K guitars were really cool. And this is back in the early 80s. So I was actively seeking out DeArmond pickups. So I'd phone up friends and, hey, do you have a pair of these? And sure, I got a pair of those. I'll trade you for this, or they're $50 or something. So I'd get a pair of these pickups and use them on one of my electric instruments. And that continued for a couple of years. And back then I wasn't making a lot of guitars, so it wasn't really critical. I wasn't, scouring the country for Diarmans. But I found enough of them. And it got to a point, though, where it was getting difficult to find them. So when I did the NAMM show in 95, I wanted to take something that was completely mine. So I I had a Diarmid pickup and I designed a pickup cover to fit that. That was my pickup cover. And that worked out really well. And when I got back from the NAMM show, I decided to go this route of having my own pickup. So I contacted Lindy Fralin, and fortunately, Lindy was able to make what I wanted. And back then, he was a smaller company, so he probably wound all that stuff himself originally. So I asked him if he could make like a late 50s, early 60s style, kind of gold foil. And he said, yeah, I love those pickups. So he was making them by hand, manila paper bobbins, hand wound by him. And I'd get a box of these things that I'd make covers for. And I'm still doing that. I probably made, I don't know, 400, 500 pickup covers, maybe more, by hand at this point. So I have this way to make them out of brass. I fold the brass and I solder in solid ends, cut them back in the table saw, file the hell out of them, round the ends over, drill the holes, polish them, send them to a chrome plater, and get a box back of these shiny little jewels. And then I packed Lindy's pickups into these things. So those pickups Lindy makes, he still makes for me after all these years. It's been like 27 years now he's been making them. And he's still into doing it. So it's great. We have a relationship now, which is really cool. So that was a big deal. So that was the start of me having something totally my own that wasn't Fender or Gibson. So that style of pickup fits really nicely in between a Fender single coil and a big humbucking pickup that Gibson would offer. So the sound was somewhere in between, and it covered a lot of territory as far as what it did. You could make it darker. You could make it sound brighter. It's hard to make a Fender pickup sound really dark unless you've got it affected to death and turn, have your amp set a certain way. So these things naturally have a great lively sound that I really like. And they're fat single coils, so they cover more of the bottom end than a Fender does, but not as much. They're, even if they're darker, they're not like a Fender. But you can make it do a lot of different things in between a Fender and a Gibson pickup. And there's a lot of people now making those. There's so many great pickup makers out there. So for me as a custom builder, and many other people use these guys too, Mojo Pickups in England, Lawler Pickups, Curtis Novak, all of these companies, and there's tons of them. They offer all sorts of things, repro pickups from the 50s and 60s. Everything is being made now. So everything's available. But I still use my Fralin pickups and the original pickup cover, because I get asked for those at least 60 or 70% of the time, because they sound a certain way and people like them. So yeah, I kind of have a brand now that fits in somewhere with all the other guitar builders in this world. So when someone comes to me, it's because they heard my guitars, they know what they sound like, they know I do custom work. So it kind of all works now for people coming to me to get something. There's a lot of options that I offer that are usable.
What makes the sound of your guitars? How much of it is the material that you use, the pickups that you use, the amp that you use, or just the way the person plays? Like what,
Yeah.
if you can break it down, how does that break down?
Well, when I first made my electric guitar in '82, it was a solid body. So really, I was kind of doing really what Fender and Gibson were doing, just a different shape. But around 1995, when I redesigned within that format that I have the shape, I decided to make them hollow, which was a big step actually, because my guitars weigh 5 or 6 pounds, like a Les Paul weighs 8 or 9 pounds. Fenders can be light, but it just, so for my instruments with those pickups, basically it's the single coil pickup screwed down directly onto the top of the hollow body. So that creates a certain type of lively sound that has, the notes have personality, I think. And I think a lot of people recognize that and like that about my instruments. So that's what they come to me for, I think, mostly.
Is it the sound because of the hollow body, or the weight of the
It's
guitar.
both. It's the sound and the weight. When you pick up a really old Martin that weighs like, I don't know, 3 pounds, 3.5 pounds, you can feel the whole thing vibrate. And I think that's one of the secrets to an acoustic guitar is how it vibrates and how lively it is, how it speaks. The voice just comes right off the top. It's fantastic. Heavier guitars are great on stage with a pickup because there's less feedback. But if you're just playing a solo thing and you want to feel the instrument, I think my instruments definitely have a certain feel, not an acoustic guitar feel, but somewhere in between. Like you can actually feel the thing vibrate, even when it's unplugged and you play it. It sounds a certain way. It's not a plank of wood with strings on it. It's more than that. So I've just continued that tradition of when I first did that in 1995. I've continued to do that and expanded on it. So all of my electric instruments are hollow, pretty much all of them except this, Kevin Stella Balistrata. From that, I designed a series called the Milano series, I made 10 instruments, pretty much all. I've got one more to make, which I'm going to take to a show in the States this year. But all of those are now sold, built, or in process. And that all came from that Stella Balistrata. And that's really one of the only instruments I made that's a solid body, but I made it thinner to take the weight down. I just wanted to do something different for that series. So really, that series based on Kevin Stella Balistrata is a departure for me. It's interesting in that aesthetically, it's more like something that Wandre or the Echo guys would make in the '60s, right? Like that kind of a European aesthetic where it's not like an American guitar. It's something that they're looking at what the Americans are doing, going, hey, we can do it this way. And everything about Italian guitars from that time period is pretty crazy, and I love it. I really think it's great. So that's my homage to what those guys were doing, in Europe in the '60s. So it's got a sparkly top. It's pretty flashy looking. There's lights on the thing with buttons, and uh, I yeah, it's just something I wanted to do.
So is it now all based on what your customer says? Can you make this? Like, are there times when you get an idea for a guitar and you just go ahead and make it? I mean, it sounds like that's not possible because
Well, it's
you have such
harder.
long commitment.
Yeah, now I've got orders in front of me constantly. So I'm trying to slow that down a bit so I have a bit more time to develop things that I want to do that I haven't had time to do. I've got a guitar coming up to make for a show in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, PA, called the Artisan Guitar Show. And it's in April. So I'm going to be building a guitar that I've never made before. It'll be the same shape as my electric, but bigger, hollow, but with a carved top. And I'm going to try some different things on that. So that's an experiment that I'm pretty sure will work well. I'm not too worried about that. It's just I want to do it and realize it for this show. And I have a dealer called CR Guitars, Craig Snyder, great guy, and he's been selling my guitars for about 13 or more years now. Um, it's a little difficult to deal with dealers too at this point for me because I get all my orders are direct now. So I'll get someone that wants to talk to me directly about building them a guitar, and I'm fine with that. I still send Craig stuff. In fact, this guitar that I'm building coming up will go to him. I think he's going to meet me at the show, and he'll take it back with him, and hopefully he'll demo it for me. He's a good musician.
Tell me about the attachment that you have towards your instrument. Like when you give it to him to sell, or when you sell to one of your clients, what is that feeling like for you?
Well, it's they're all kids, right? They're all your children. So sometimes it's hard to let them go. Some I wish I could keep, but at the end of the day, this is what I do for a living. So the commerce part of it takes over, and I let it go, get the money for it, build more stuff. Um, yeah, I get attached to them like any builder would. I think because it's a real personal thing. I mean, you work on something for a month at a time, and it's pretty intense. The whole process, and I do everything too. I do all my, aside from making all the hardware on the guitar and the parts, I do all the spray finishing too. So I do everything here. Um, and I have my hands on all of those processes. So I wear all of the hats. So I get pretty involved with every instrument I make. And I like everything I make because originally, mostly I made them for myself anyway, based on my interest in music and what I was listening to when I was younger and continue to listen to. There's all sorts of things out there that are great music wise. I mean, it's just so open. And I can't imagine just making one thing. I know a lot of people concentrate on flat tops or just electrics or just bass guitars. But for me, when I listen to music, wow, I just want to make stuff like I'm hearing. And I think that's part of it. That's, it's sort of a blessing and a curse. The blessing part is that I get to make a lot of different things that are really interesting. Um, the curse is that I don't have a setup that allows me to do it quicker. So I really have to do them all by hand. And like I said earlier, I have to retrain myself every time. I had one interesting experience years ago. I was invited by a friend of mine, John Zosky, who's a great musician, and he was curating a show at the AGO, and it was about musical instruments, mostly non-traditional music instruments like chairbacks with strings and sensors and pickups. I think one of John's pieces was you walk into a room and the whole room reacted with people moving around in it, etc., and created sound. But he liked my instruments and he asked if I could put a couple of things in. So I just happened to have a electric mandocello and a mandolin, and I submitted those, and they were hanging on the wall in the show. And the opening night was great. There was a guy there from the States. His name was Elliot Sharp, really great musician, and he liked what he saw, and he asked John if he could for an introduction. So we talked, and I gave Elliot a card, and about 3 weeks later, I got a call from this woman, Jin Hee Kim, and she asked me if I could build a komungo. I didn't even know what a komungo was. So she said, I play a komungo, and she described this thing. And I did some research and found out it's this crazy long 6-foot Korean instrument that goes back probably almost 2,000 years. Probably started as a half hollow log, really, with strings on it. And she wanted a shorter version that she could carry onto a plane, etc., and take with her, and more strings. So I met her at the music gallery in Toronto and took tons of photos of this thing, talked to her for hours, measured her instrument, went back. She went back to the States, and I'm building this komungo that I had no idea about. So I started designing it and building it, and I kind of got it after a while what it was. Even though it was totally foreign and it had frets about 3 inches high down to about half an inch, and you play it overhand. You pluck it, push down on the strings as you're plucking it with like a bamboo stick on the other end, kind of like a Japanese koto, I guess, that idea. But you can actually fret this thing, and so it had sympathetic strings with movable saddles. So I got to make all these parts, and it was fascinating. And I she wanted it electronic too because she wanted to play it through her computer in a sound system to alter the sound sheet, the signal. So I found these sensors. They were designed for earthquake sensing. And I bought two of these tiny little things, kind of a piezo element, but I don't know what else it was. But I found the sweet spot inside and stuck two of these in there, and it worked. And had a little sound system in my shop. I plugged it in, and I could hear stuff coming out of it. I'm trying to play it, and I had no idea what to do with this thing. And I thought, oh my god, I totally screwed it up. And I'm going to pick her up at the airport in about 2 hours at Pearson, bring her back to my shop to get the instrument so she could take it with her. And I was sweating bullets because I thought I totally screwed this. I had no idea what I was doing with this. And so I'm trying to play it, and I couldn't make any sense of it. So I pick her up, take her to my shop. We plug it into the sound system, and she just starts playing this thing. I had it tuned up the way she wanted, and she was just making music with it immediately, playing it. She said, "Oh, this is great." And it was like, "Oh my god!" And, I sat down. I thought, "Oh, thank God this worked." Because I was truly freaked out. I thought I messed it up big time. So that was fun. So it's the only electric komungo in the whole world, apparently, and she plays it all over the place. And there's lots of video of her. She plays kind of outside stuff. She's not playing traditional Korean music on it. She plays with the Kronos Quartet and Henry Kaiser and all sorts of people have played with Jin Hee Kim, doing fairly experimental music, really. And that's what she uses it for. And
It's crazy that you could build things that you know nothing about.
well,
I mean, I know you do your research, but
yeah, well,
like before she contacted you, you had no idea what this
no,
thing was.
I'd never heard of her or the instrument at all. But based on Elliot Sharp saying Joe can make this for you, which was really nice of him to do. Actually, I was that was a bonus. And I mean, I was petrified, but sort of really excited at the same time. I wanted to dig right into this thing, and it took me a long time to make it. And when I got it done, I even made the case for it. I made this huge case and lined it in plush crushed velvet, and I made it this little stand because it was so big. She had to sit down with a foot controller for the computer, hold it on her lap, and usually you play these things on the floor, but this thing was kind of ungainly. It was big and wide, so I made her a little folding stand with a leather slung top on it, so that folded up and fit underneath the Comungo in the guitar case. So I made all of this stuff for this thing very specifically. Um, it was fun. It was a great project. I do more of that kind of thing. It's really not easy to do, but it really gets you going and takes you to places that you didn't know existed. I had no idea about this, so when I designed it, I just dove into it and figured it out and designed all the parts for it that ended up working really, really well. It was kind of lucky in a way.
I wonder. You mentioned this a little while ago about a little accident that you had,
Yeah,
and I remember when that happened because I think people were quite concerned, and I think there was rumors that maybe your guitar making days were over and
yeah.
whatever. Tell me about that. What that incident did to you, for you, how it affected you.
Um, well, it was about 4 days before my 60th birthday. I just moved out here maybe 5 months prior to that, where I am now in Wainfleet. I'm close to Lake Erie, hour and a half from Toronto. I'm in this big old post and beam building built in 1887, and best shop I've ever had. It's totally inspiring here. Set all my machines up, and I was building the first batch of guitars because I hadn't had any income for quite a while. So I was getting a little concerned. I needed to start making money, so I was working on 3 or 4 instruments, and one day I just came into the shop and I guess I was distracted. I mean, those kind of accidents happen really easily if you're not paying attention. And I've been doing woodworking for so long. I've been using machinery for 40, almost 50 years, and 10 years ago this happened. Um, right away, I think I saw a for sale sign on my front lawn. I just moved here, and I thought, how am I going to do this? I cut my finger off and part of my thumb. Uh, I was in shock. I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I ran over across the street to my neighbor's house. He wasn't home. He's always there. So I ended up driving myself to the hospital. And all the way there, I'm thinking, I won't be building guitars anymore. I remember thinking that this is the end of it for me. How can I do this anymore? But, you know, after after the shock element and I settled into figuring out how I could do this, I just started to work again. In fact, I had a friend of mine was someone I just met was building a guitar under my tutelage in my shop, and this happened not when he was here, but during the time he was building his guitar. And so, Mike, I called him up and I said, "Hey, Mike, I had a bit of an accident. I don't know if we can do the lesson this week." And I told him what happened, and he was like, "Oh my God!" He came right over. It was all my friends kind of circled the wagons around me. It was really nice. They did a huge benefit at Hughes Room and raised some money for me so I could continue until I recovered. I had a long time. I had all summer. It was funny because I I'd never had a summer off since I was a kid. So here I'm all bandaged up and I'm down at the beach reading a book and just looking out at Lake Erie because I couldn't work. So I had a lot of time to think about it, and I realized that yeah, I can do this. It's going to hurt, but I've got to do this is what I do for a living. What am I going to do otherwise? So I just kind of got back in the saddle and started building again. I finished those instruments off, and I had a bit of help making hardware from a friend of mine, and because I couldn't really hold a file very well, so there were things I couldn't do yet. But eventually, that all went away, and I got to using the tools and just my right hand. It's funny because I'm right-handed, so I always say that my right hand has a PhD and my left hand dropped out of high school. Basically, that's the skill level of both hands. That's sort of not true, but that's how skilled I am with my right hand. That my right hand is everything to me. So when I lost my index finger and part of that thumb, it was kind of frightening. But now everything's good. I've just learned different ways to use my hands, and I can do it again.
I think you've answered this already, but after all this time, what continues to inspire you to do what you do?
Oh, just making things. I love making things. You start with an idea, and at the end of the idea, you've got this thing in front of you that has a life of its own, and you're going to hand it off to someone else. That applies to furniture too. It doesn't matter anything you make that someone else is going to use and enjoy. That's so fulfilling for me. So just the thought of building something that somebody's really excited about. I've got a lot of repeat customers at this point. Like a lot of people have 2, 3, 5 instruments, 4 instruments. Kevin's got 10. Um, yeah, it's just when they come back for another round of this, it's exciting, it's exhilarating. So it's partly the friendship aspect of it, getting to know people through music and through the instruments and what they do and what I do. It's a real big community, and I'm not coming really from that community like Grit, Linda, David, other people too. They all kind of grew up together doing this. I didn't have that. I had furniture folks and people like that. I mean, I worked for Holt Renfrew and the Four Seasons, and I had big contracts when I was a furniture maker. It was a whole other world. So doing the instrument thing is great because guitar players are they're more generous, they're more fun. When you're dealing with a planning department, they just want something on time, within this budget. End of story. You have to do that or there's litigation. So it's always nice to not have that hanging over your head and getting into knowing someone through what you're doing and what they do as well. That's a really big part of it for me and continues to be. It's exciting.
I presume it's a very solitary thing to do. I get the feeling that you work with other people or you mentor people, but
Mm-hmm.
when all is said and done, when you're creating these guitars, I presume you're spending a lot of time on your own.
Oh, tons, yeah. Mostly on my own. Yeah.
And what goes through your mind? Is it all about the build or what happens in those solitary moments?
Well, it's such an exciting thing to build things. And some of it is boring. Sanding wood's not much fun. But you kind of get into this. I don't even know how to describe this. It's when I'm doing something, I'm thinking about the next step. I'm thinking about how I'm going to reconcile this detail, how I'm going to do this, how I'm going to do that. Then I jump up to the spray booth and I'm thinking about how I'm going to spray it, what colors I'm going to use. So there's so many things to think about all the time. I don't really have time to be bored, honestly. And because I make a lot of different instruments, as I mentioned before, I'm constantly thinking about what I did before to make this work this time. So retraining is part of my deal. I don't rely on all my jigs and fixtures. I have to actually really dig in and think about what this means and what it's going to be and how I'm going to change this for this customer. The scale length thing, the neck shapes, everything, the radius of the fingerboard, how you do this, where all the hardware is placed on the instrument. It's all a big deal. So when I'm doing it by hand and laying it out with a pencil and a ruler. I have jigs for certain things, but oftentimes someone wants to switch down here and I just drill it. I don't have jigs for all that. So I mark it out and drill it and be careful doing it. So it's all hands on and thinking about what I'm doing at the time. I'm not hitting a button and the machine's doing some work that I'm going to take off the machine later. That's all cool too. Sometimes I wish I had that. One of my favorite things is neck carving. I'm pretty fast at it. I've carved so many necks now that I just get into this rhythm of doing it. And, with the micrometer and all of the numbers I have to work with, I can get that right down to what it has to be, the neck shape. And you get asked for a lot of different things like compound shapes, asymmetrical shapes, a D shape, a C shape, a V shape, hard V, soft V. There's all sorts of different ways to carve a neck. And when I'm talking to a customer about this stuff, I get the picture of what they want based on what they're telling me too. And I'll make some suggestions and away we go. There's no time to be bored, really.
When you're building an instrument for a musician, is there interaction in between, or do they see the instrument before the very end, or
Yeah,
is the very end the first time they see it?
the beauty of cameras and iPhones, etc., is these things are fantastic for me. So every other builder would agree with this too. Oftentimes, customers will want progress shots, so I'll have the body without the top on. I'll take some shots, send that. Um, so every step of the way, I kind of send photos. Sometimes dozens of photos go out, before the instrument's finished. And then when I finish the instrument, I usually use my iPhone these days because it's much easier and the quality the iPhone is fantastic. Like the cameras on those things is amazing. So you can do a lot, and with Instagram and Facebook and other social media, it's great to post things. Um, that helps a lot too. Like the whole notion of social media is something that I didn't start with. Anybody my age building will agree with this. It's like, wow, there was nothing before. You'd mail things out, you'd make a phone call, write some letters. I did tons of that. When the computer came in, email was great though, because even that without phones was just wonderful to be able to back and forth. And now with the technology we have, it's so easy to communicate with people. So I can send photos around the world, and they can see what I'm doing on my bench pretty much right now. It's great.
So, how many different projects are you currently working on? How many different instruments are there in that building right now?
Right now, I've got the arch top, I've got a flat top, and I've got a couple of electrics that I'm working on right now. I try not to get too much going at once. I rarely build just one instrument. It's usually minimum two, often about three or four in a batch. It speeds things up a little bit, especially in the spray booth, because when you're shooting on lacquer and sealer and your grain filling, it's good to do it all at once, really. And I try and get it to that point. I just finished a batch of 5 instruments, electric, all of them, and they're all radically different. One of them was for Kevin, and it was I call it the washi paper guitar series. So it's basically Japanese washi paper from the Japanese paper place in Toronto. One day I was sitting here. This is before Kevin got his. I had this idea of making another series like I did with the Milanos, because it's fun to do things in a series, because you can take this block of X number of instruments and make them similar. They all relate. They're all kind of related, and it's separate from all the other stuff I do as well. So I was looking to maybe turn one of my electric guitars into what Fender did in the '60s, do a Paisley style instrument. They used wallpaper, Paisley wallpaper, glued it on the top, and lacquered over it, clear lacquer. There it was. So I really liked that idea. I thought, well, I'll make a Yanuziello that's got Paisley on it. So I'm looking around for Paisley wallpaper and coming up dry, and I thought, oh, I wonder if the Japanese paper place has any. So I'm online on their website, and all of this stuff pops up, and all of a sudden I had this idea to do this series with this Japanese washi paper, and it's happening now. I built two of them only, but I've got a whole stack of this paper that I'm just excited to get into using. But this is where, I have to get an order for one, or I have to build one on spec and then sell it myself or send it to Crane or whatever. And there's too much else to do right now. So sometimes I'm waiting for a little space to build something that I want to build, right? Instead of building something that someone's asking me to build, which is fine too, because they're all my guitars at the end of the day. But taking the time now to do things on spec is a little harder. But yeah, when I did that Japanese paper one, Kevin was pretty excited about it, and he ended up ordering them. So one of the last batch I did had his guitar in it.
So, speaking of Kevin, because I did ask him about you, and I said, what is it that makes your guitars so great to him?
I know
Like, why does he love your guitar so much? And the first thing he said was that it's so reliable, that he knows that it's going to be in tune.
Yeah.
He can go all over the world, and he'll travel, and it'll be on planes and whatever. He'll get on stage, and then it's in tune, like as soon as he takes it out, and that all the pieces are there. It's really well built. If I was to ask you what makes your guitars what it is, how would you describe that?
Um, well, aesthetically, they're all mine. Like what I've come up with design wise is no one else's but mine. Just like Kevin's playing is his playing. It's identifiable. And I think my guitars are pretty identifiable that way. The quality thing is important. And I think that's what Kevin responds to as well, because he's truly using these things as tools. More than any other player I know, he needs something because it does this. He's got so many different instruments, and I get it with him too. And the funny thing about Kevin and many other great players, as soon as they play a note or two on any instrument, it's them. There's many players, Jeff Beck's like that. There's so many players that fall into that category. Django Reinhardt, Pat Metheny, Julian Leger, so many players. And Kevin's definitely there too. So whatever he plays, he's going to sound good on. And I think he's exaggerating about them not being out of tune. I think, sure, they go out of tune. Everything goes out of tune. I mean, it's really nice of him to say that, but I get where he's going with it, is he can rely on them. And when you're on stage with an instrument that's not reliable, it's frightening because this is how you're making your living. It could be a room of 1,000 people or 10 people like Grossman's. It doesn't matter. You have to be up there and perform. People are there to see you perform. So it is a big deal. So that is important. The whole mechanical aspect of a guitar is as important as anything. So I try and do the whole thing and make them work really well and make them look good and feel good. I mean, it's a big package, right? Um, that's it, really. I don't know what else I could say about that.
My final question to you is that person who said, I'm going to go out and make my own guitars and do this full time, to where you are today. Could you have imagined that you would be here? I presume you could, but is this where you wanted to be? Does any of the journey surprise you?
Not really. I'm a real slow burner. I didn't dive into the deep end at all. I had my cabinet job, which paid really well. And once I kind of got tired of building cabinets. I was getting older, and it was hard work. And I didn't have a huge shop. I had a few people that I would do bigger jobs with. I'd hire people to help me in the shop. When I got into the guitar thing, it was truly because I love music and I like musical instruments and I like building that. It covers so much territory for me. It's a functional piece of art, is what it is for me. And furniture is to a lesser degree. I mean, a chair, you sit on it, but it doesn't really do anything else. The guitar is part of your identity, really, especially guitars and musical instruments of that nature. Less so with pianos and drums and keyboards, but the guitar is a sexy thing, right? And that's what I've tried to maintain. That aspect of it is exciting, and it becomes everything. The player can use it as a tool. It's identifiable for the audience. It's part of them. A good example of that is Jimi Hendrix, really, with the Stratocaster. I mean, that guitar is part of him. Physically, it's attached to him in so many ways. And I like that aspect of the musical instrument, that it's part of this person that's using it to make music. And Kevin does it really well, and many other people do too. So I think that's a real big thing for me, is to have that aspect of it.
Well put. Joseph, it's been a real pleasure getting to know you, and thank you so much for taking this time.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you.